Hi everyone, welcome to another class. This time we're painting these street lights. This is a painting that I just recently did, and I actually painted this similar object twice. What happened was I painted these street lights on a bigger sheet of watercolor paper, which was rough 156 pounds on Arches paper, and which is this one right here. But the thing is that once I started adding all these plants and trees around, I really didn't like it that much. It was okay for me, but I felt like I lost like the sense of the focus. Like this is all about these lights, and I thought all these colorful branches just kind of took it away. At least this is my opinion. So I decided to paint these lights again, and of course it took me faster. It took me 1/3 of that time that I painted the street lights with all these branches. So that one took me about an hour and a half, while this one took me only half hour. So that just goes to show you. And because I painted these street lights already once, second time it was just like a breeze. It was super fast. I also focused a lot on where do I need to preserve the lights and everything, but it was just easier because I was going over it again in a way. So this is going to be our reference photo. So I found it on the website Pixabay. A lot of my reference photos come from this website or Unsplash.com. So the important part here is to focus on preserving light. So this picture is dark already in a way because of all that shadow that's hitting it, perhaps from a tree that's right next to it on the right side, because there's a little more light from the left side. So that's the thing, like some parts have more light in them and some are darker. So we still have to go from light to dark, and I'm going to try to make it lighter anyway and in the painting itself so we can see more of that green. So for the colors, I chose Viridian Hue as one of my main colors because it's like kind of this sea green color, and it kind of resembles actually that street light that I'm looking at right now. So I wanted to use that color, and then indigo, lots of indigo, because that's a blue color and it's a darker blue color, and I like to darken up the greens with indigo, a lot of it actually. For the white part, the lamps, I like to use yellow ochre, and I do use cobalt blue sometimes for white when I paint white in watercolors, or peach phthalo blue, and then some of the Van Dyke brown and burnt sienna. It's just to make that white stand out. So true white doesn't exist in real nature. That's why we have to make that white with colors. So I'll talk about colors more as we paint. And here's all the colors I used for this painting. Then you have the palette as well, which indicates where exactly I placed my colors, watercolors, onto the palette on the wells. This is the pencil sketch. You can download this sketch as well, or you can try to sketch it on your own. For the brushes, I mainly used Round 8 Black Velvet series by Silver Brush. This is a softer brush with a longer and pointy end. I like this brush a lot. And if you don't like it, it's too soft, you can use, for example, Long Round Aqua Elite by Princeton, something like that, or even Escoda has a similar brush, but I think it's much softer, which is Aquario series. And this is Arches watercolor paper rough, 156 pounds, 140 pounds is good as well. I recommend to paint on a larger sheet of a watercolor paper so you have more room to focus on details. Now, first thing I like to do is use a washi tape to create that white frame, and it also helps me to keep the paper in place. So I just go along the paper, and the only areas that stick out are the corners. So basically those are the areas of the tape that touched my glass top table. It's important to notice that I am painting wet on dry right from the start. I do a lot of my work usually wet on wet, which gives me that nicer and softer effect. This is the strategy I used here in this painting. First of all, as you're watching this, you're like, okay, I'm going so fast and I'm mixing all these colors as I go. That's the thing, like I am looking at the reference photo, and my idea strategy is go wet on dry and mix colors as you go. So sometimes I will grab one color, then I will go to the other well and grab another color, and then I'll just start bringing it over to this light bulb. But the thing is that I'm also painting in different areas and letting some parts touch each other so the colors bleed into each other and they merge in a way. So they blend, and they blend in a softer way at the same time, because as I am painting wet on dry, the areas that I'm touching, they're gonna like become wet all together. So they will blend onto each other. What I'm trying to say is I'm not painting wet on wet. This is still wet on dry. But once you add that paint and then next door, right next to it, there is more paint, then these colors obviously blend and run into each other. I want that because I want these colors to run into each other. So the thing is that for this piece of the lamp now, I am also painting wet on dry, and I am bringing all these parts, accenting all these lines with a darker color that I mixed. There's the Viridian Hue, there's Indigo, and after that I'm gonna start adding a little more water. But the thing is that first I'm accenting these areas and I'm still mixing these colors. This is a very different a little bit to what I normally show in my paintings, because I do a lot of things wet on wet. And this is wet on dry, and the reason I chose wet on dry is because I really want these colors to blend in a different way. Like, and I don't want the colors to be everywhere. I want to preserve white. So it's much easier to paint wet on dry, and you definitely have more control when you paint wet on dry versus wet on wet, because right from the start you decide where that paint is going to land on your paper. When you paint wet on wet, you're adding paint, but the paint spreads super fast because you have water already on your paper, so you can't control it as much. You do control it because you can push the paint around, you can lift up the colors and so on, but it's very different experience comparing to wet on dry. So what happens here is that light bulb to my left is wet, and now I'm painting this piece, the greenish piece of that lamp post, and the reality is that if I went all the way to that edge, the green would bleed onto my light bulb. It will happen sometimes, and that's okay because I also want that effect. I like when some parts will bleed onto the cleaner area. It makes it very like watercolory, like very organic way in a way. So I'm very slowly going, and yes, these sides like merge in a way, but because I'm starting from left side, I start from the left side a little bit in the middle part, and then I keep going to the right side, and then I moved all the way to the left of that post part. That area kind of dried, so that's the thing, some parts will dry and then I move faster to do the other side. For example, I know that parts are wet and the paint might bleed, but the idea here is it's a little different than I normally paint. That's what I'm trying to say. Like, I'm okay with some parts to bleed. The only thing I want to really keep clean is like some areas of that light bulb, because I want to define that light bulb and I want to have a cleaner look, unless it has colors from the top of that light bulb. So the right above is that post, and I'll be okay if the colors bled down because you would still have that reflection. So I continue painting that post, and I am painting wet on dry. I'm defining the darker parts of that post. I am omitting some parts. That's the thing. You don't want to just add paint everywhere. You want to omit some areas. And the amount of paint you have on your brush is like, the paint is concentrated, but not as much. You definitely have to have water. But the thing is that the way like the water is on my brush and paint, some parts on the brush, like they have more paint, and like the belly carries more water. So if you do calligraphy, like I don't, but I think that's the idea, like the way you pressure, like put that pressure on the pen, sometimes it releases more ink, and then if you do it different way, then you have less ink or more ink. So I think that's the way I can explain a little bit how I hold my brush. I do the same thing with my brush. It's how I put that pressure on the brush. So sometimes I'll have more paint coming out, and sometimes I'll have less paint coming out. And I continue adding different colors. So that's the thing, like I added in one place, I added like Viridian Hue, then I added some of the peach phthalo blue, I added, Indigo. then sap green, then leaf green. And I am mixing these colors on the paper as I go, and at the same time now I am trying to make sure I don't lose my lines, so they are still like straight, these pieces of that light post, so it looks nice. I don't want the size or the shape of it to be off too much. It's okay if it's a little bit off, because it will look more organic in the way, like it's more in a watercolor way, but I still want to stick to some parts to make it more clean in a way. So I'm adding those colors. The bottom part of this piece to the right of that post is gonna have a little more color for sure, because that would be like where the shadow hits. And that right side, the right light bulb, I'm gonna also paint it very organic way, I guess, and wet on dry. I'm not gonna worry too much about it. Like, I want just to mix colors as I go and add slowly very, very diluted paint, like pale washes. So that's the thing. The light post has very vibrant colors. Like, I want these colors. I want a lot of that vibrancy in the post, because it's like nice green, aqua green color. And then the light bulbs are going to be light, so much lighter than the post. So you want to keep that in mind, that the paint concentrated with water will be different for those parts. So I'm just adding water, I'm spreading the paint so to finish up that post. And the way I position my brush now is because I want to create a straight line. So you also have to figure out for yourself what is the best way you can position your arm so the line is straight from on both sides. And you don't have to finish the bottom part. You can just kind of leave it open, like some parts paper white. Like, it looks really nice when you can preserve those spots. So in a way, I dry brushed that bottom part of the post. I am definitely going faster painting this light post, or the lights, street lights, comparing to my previous painting that I was sharing at the beginning of this video. And so, because I already have this practice of painting the exact same street lights, so it's easier for me, like, okay, I remember kind of like from a memory, like what worked better and how I liked it better too. So, like, let's say I added too much paint in some area and I thought, oh, I should have preserved more light, or I should have made that part lighter. I know these things that I did before, and I'm gonna try to do these street lights in a little lighter way. So I want to keep this a little more organic. So I like the way the paint is spreading now, and how I am accenting the lines, and that's the thing. I need darker colors for the post to paint those middle parts to make this post round. So I have to have a little more paint on one side, and especially in the middle. And then I'm still kind of like drawing almost, but with a brush, drawing in a way those lines, and making sure I added enough contrast. What would be also in the shadow, more in the shadow, so it's darker in a way. So there's more green, and as I am painting this light bulb, I am again accenting some parts, and again, this is majority of this painting is just wet on dry. It's just wet on dry, which again, it is easier than wet on wet for sure. This painting itself, I say it's like a level 4/5, because like it does take a steady hand for sure to go to create straight lines, and like to round up the light bulbs. And it's about the amount of paint you bring onto your paper, how much water you have, and all these little accents and stuff like that. So I'd say, like, it's best probably if you watch this once and then pause and then watch it again while you're going to paint it, but pause at sections. Watch like 10 minutes and try to do it all on your own, and it will go much smoother versus trying to catch up with me here, because I am going pretty fast. And I normally already paint fast, but this is much faster because I already know exactly what I'm doing. So someone asked me before, actually there's a couple people that asked me on YouTube how many practices I take like on a certain reference photo to paint before I record a video. I said I don't. It's just my first try. And that's true, guys. I just do it, and I totally go into my zone. I focus on the painting and I do it. I don't have to do those tries, because what comes to that and what helps is planning. Planning your colors, having everything lined up on your table, creating a sketch on your own. When you create that sketch, you are already thinking about all the colors you're going to use, where those colors are going to go, how you're going to paint it. So make a plan if you're going to do wet on wet or wet on dry. I already knew I'm going to do wet on dry. And this is the light bulb. That's the thing, the light bulb. The colors are way more diluted with water. This is much softer. But I am adding colors. So not just the yellow ochre, Van Dyke brown, but this light bulb will have the colors from this post reflected too. So you will see those colors in the glass as well. So that's why it's important to remember that we're gonna see these colors. So we can't just paint like the top one, for example, because the top one doesn't have much of those green colors. Doesn't have that much of the reflection of these colors. So that's why the top one is much lighter, and then suddenly the bottom light bulb is so like bright in colors in a way. But it's a pale wash, and the paint is more diluted with water, and I was mixing these colors on the paper inside that light bulb. So I was starting with blues on the top, and then I had to add some of the Viridian hue, because you have all this the light post with all these greens, so you're gonna see those greens as well, like in that light bulb. So it's important not to overplay that area, so not to do too much, and keep like your eyes on the light bulb as you're working it, so you stop on time right before it starts drying, so you don't create the blooms. Now I am creating my purple, and I am doing the same thing. Parts of this light bulb are also like dry brushing, so this way you will preserve some spots to stay white. And I think that's important for that kind of look, if you're going for that look. So you drag your brush a little bit, so you have paint and water, but you don't really have that much on your brush, so you can preserve these white spots. So it's like a nice and natural look in a way. And on the edges, I want that roundness to it, so I want to define that round shape of this light bulb. So that's why I'm adding a little more color on the edges. And then on the inside, when you study the light bulb, you're gonna have all these little wires and stuff like that. That's why I added a little darker color on the inside of that light bulb. And this part is not as visible because I have the washi tape and I didn't do the sketch big enough, but I'm still like adding some color there. And the bottom part of this part of the post does have darker color, so I have to remember that, and I'm gonna go again later to add more color to it. So again, mixing colors, sometimes on the paper and sometimes they are still being mixed on the well. And I'm painting the left side of that post. So it's going to be lighter in colors because the light is hitting more from the left side, and then you have all this shadow coming from the right side. So the light side is going to be much lighter if it comes down to that light post. So I'm doing the same thing. I'm just kind of mixing colors as I go, and I have to be careful where the parts are still wet in that light bulb to the right, the middle one, because the colors will just start merging. And a little bit is okay because I like the look of it, but I still want to be careful. And when I'm painting this piece now, basically it's like I want to preserve also some parts to stay white, but then I want darker colors as well, so I'll be adding more color to it later too. And this piece later on is gonna have another layer. It's gonna be much darker. Now for this part of the light bulb, this is going to be also darker in colors, but we have to build it up by layers. So for now I'm just adding some of the green, but now I'm grabbing a little darker color and I'm drawing these lines, so it's all the electrical part of the light bulb, all the electrical part. some Van Dyke Brown, there's my neutral tint, a little bit of indigo. And I'm looking at my reference photo and I'm following the lines. I'm following what I see like in the reference photo, what's darker, where should I preserve light. Sometimes you just have to make stuff up too, because let's say the reference photo is too dark or it's not how you're planning to paint something. You want to paint it a little different way, and obviously we're painting with watercolors, so we also can have that different look to it. So like we're preserving the light and things like that. So that's the darker part, and then I'm trying to darken up already the left side of this post, but it's a little too early because that part is still wet, and I'll have to wait till it dries so I can darken it up and add more darker tones to it. So I might as well paint another piece, and that's why I jumped to that area now, so I can darken up this part. That part dried for the most part, so I can darken it up and add more color to it. So I guess the important thing to mention as well is that when I paint this, I am adding in some areas I'm adding more color, and some I try to just leave it and preserve more light. And so that's the thing, like you don't want to add paint everywhere. You want to leave some places more open in a way. This is a Viridian Hue, my aqua green color, and I'm just adding more color to it. So I'm still playing with it. Like, it does help to paint something once before and then you just kind of doing it again, although this is going to be a different version because I use kind of different colors, less colors for sure, and focusing mostly on the street lamps, and I'm not adding like the plants, so I don't have those plants like reflect, the colors don't reflect in the light bulbs, so I don't have to worry about those quin magentas and stuff like that. It's mostly about the greens and blues and all these colors. So now for this light bulb, that's why I'm rinsing my brush. I have another water right above this dirty water, so if you see my brush going off camera, it's because I'm going for the cleaner water. And again, I'm doing the same thing. I'm like omitting some parts of that area of that light bulb, and I am moving with my brush, cleaning my brush, and grabbing colors. So mixing colors as I go. And to recreate those light colors, you want to think of all the colors that surround the white, and that's what would reflect into that light bulb. And that's why we're adding those colors. And the way I'm moving my brush is kind of more like a lazy way, and a lot of it I'm using the tip of my brush and just dragging the paint for more control, like I'm trying to round it all up. And some areas will have more color, but mostly this is still on the lighter side, and definitely it is a pale wash. So this light bulb is much paler compared to this the metal part of this street lights. And I need to darken up the top part of this light bulb. We have all this mechanical stuff. The wires are over there on top, so that part will have a little darker spots. And a little bit of Van Dyke Brown, adding that as well. There's my Van Dyke Brown, a neutral tint, adding the darker tone again here, the same thing on the other light bulb. And that's the thing, it's like slowly adding colors and to create that contrast, the shadows, so it all works together. So it's important to like right away picture from the beginning what side of the lamp you're gonna keep lighter, where do you want to preserve the light, because you need that balance. You don't want just everything like be in the same kind of tone. You want that light and then you want the dark, so it kind of gives you balance, and it looks more natural too and prettier on the paper once you're done painting. But the bottom part here is definitely darker because this is like the underneath part, so that would be shadowed in a way. So what I'm doing right now is I wetted this piece, and there's my blue, there's my neutral tint, there's some of the Viridian Hue. I'm going to create those kind of shadows on the post, so it's like the reflection, the shadows from the trees above. So I'm adding this paint actually wet on wet, so not wet on dry anymore, but wet on wet. So parts are more defined, so I'm using tip of my brush to still make it even, so the lines are nice and straight, and then just kind of like odd shapes, because this is just the reflection of some leaves right above, or I mean to the right side and stuff like that. so I don't need to overwork it. So I can move on to this part of this stand and the post and just add color, more color. But I do want those lines in the middle. I want these to be defined because that's the shape of this post in the real life and the photograph. So I added those lines first, wet on dry, and then I wetted it with a water to soften it all up. But I still want to make sure I have these lines. So it's easy to lose them if you add too much water, and or now like when you add paint and you have too much water mixed in with your paint, then those lines will just easily disappear. So you have to be careful. And I am adding the blue here, so I'm still working that area because it's wet. So the paper is wet, and as long as it's wet, evenly wet, I can still play with it and I can add colors. There's my indigo. Because if it was already like drying and I was trying to do the same thing, the same move to create these shadows, it wouldn't just work. I would have created blooms. And blooms, it's just so easy to create blooms. That's why you have to be careful. And we're back to this area that I was mentioning earlier that I was going to darken it up and add those shadows. So it's like hidden area, so it's darker. And so I'm going slow and I'm using the tip of my brush because it's the most control that I have. And I'm going slow and just painting, I want to say drawing. It's almost like drawing, but with a brush. So I am defining those lines and making sure I go along, so it's like I have that shape and everything. So it's so I don't lose like the perspective, and it all works together well. So my lines are straight. So I'm going slow and I'm making sure it all stays in place. So I go slow with my hand, and the way I position my hand is so it's kind of like it doesn't move. So sometimes my elbow is like leaning on a table in a way, so it doesn't move too much. So I can go in a straight way. So I'm darkening up still more and just looking at the paint. Whatever is a little bit still wet, I can still add the paint without worrying about the blooms. So it just depends what areas. So it's like your eyes are going from left to right. Where else can I add color? What else can I darken it up? But gradually, because you don't want to overdo it. These are like some nails in there, so I don't want to cover those white spots. I want to keep them white. And this area is drying. It's still wet though. But because I have darker color on my brush, I'm still using this paint. I don't want to waste it. So I'm like drawing these lines and I'm working over, like going over these areas so I can still continue working on it. So I just wanted to darken up a little bit of that light bulb, just add a little color, more phthalo blue, and from the top at the same time, because the top part of the light bulb would be darker and would have some of that viridian hue as well. So this is when I'm adding more color on top of that piece, because the previous layer has dried, so I can still see my previous layer that there were some lines that I already painted, some lines I defined it. So there's a couple ways you can do it, or a couple million ways you can paint this. You can make this light, the post, even lighter if you want to. It just depends which direction you're going. If you're going for vibrancy, then I recommend to paint it this way. Right now, I am just defining smaller details, and if you don't have this brush or you don't have the long round Aqua Elite Series 8, size 8, you can use a smaller brush like a round 0 or 2 for these tiny details like lines. So I'm just doing like the final touches, and this brush, because it's long and round and it has this pointy end, it serves like having almost like a second brush right away, which is a smaller brush. So larger brush with the belly to bring all this paint, and then you can use the top tip of the brush to do all the smaller details. So that's the thing, like now I'm using the Rigger Brush 0 Versatile Series by Skoda, and I just need those wires, like the little wires sticking out here and there, which that little accent like adds a lot. So I like to add little things like that, and Rigger Brush is like excellent brush. It's like I love this brush so much because of what you can do with it, because it's long and it's thin, and just the way it moves, or you can move it, it gives you that nice and long line. So that's the thing, I'm just painting the wires, and I almost overdid the wires because I love to paint these wires. It was just so much fun. I just love this brush, and that's the thing, it's just like continuing adding all these wires. It kind of reminds me of one of my students. We were painting the coconuts from the 21 Days of Summer series, and she said that she had to stop herself from painting all that hair on a coconut because she was enjoying it so much. That's the thing, like I feel the same way. Sometimes I enjoy it too much, like painting the hair, or in this case I was all these wires and lines. It's like, what else can I use this brush with all this paint? What else can I add something to it? It just depends how much you want. So this is pretty much it. There's just a little bit more color, but the painting is pretty much done. I'm just adding a little more color to my top light bulb, only because it just needs a little more color compared to all the other ones, although this one is way in the back. It seems in the back and it's not as shadowed, so it doesn't have as much of that blue color. So I still want to keep it on the lighter side, and I'm just bringing more color as a reflection maybe from the light post, but I don't need as much, and that's why the front ones will definitely have more color compared to the back one. So these are just final touches, just adding last few strokes, some of that yellow ochre, there is some Van Dyke brown, and spreading some of that pink, but I do not want to lose my white spots, the areas that I preserve to stay white. So that's the thing. So here I just have to be careful to not overdo it and not to go over the light bulbs too much. So I still have my nice contrast and balance, and I can still see those light spots. So this was my round 8 Black Velvet Series brush, which was mostly used in this painting. And my favorite part is always to remove the washi tape, because this is when we can see the entire painting and you can decide if you like the washi tape or not, because you do have right away that white frame. Thank you so much, guys.